لله رب العالمين على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما متعلما إنك على كل شيء قدير. Okay, so as we summarized last week, and we're going to review right now, we have four in the Shafi'i school. We have four causes of four things that break the wudu. Again, what do we mean by the Shafi'i school? We mean the research of approximately 10,000 top-notch scholars for the last 1,000 years or more, looking at the Quran and Sunnah. So when somebody says, no, the rajih is this, the correct position is this, it's fundamentally off in your understanding. What it means is you're assuming that there's one answer and there aren't more than one answer, isn't more than one answer, which is wrong. You're assuming that large groups of people have either been ignorant of certain hadith or certain verses of the Quran or whatever it is, that they're actually ignorant about Islam, or that they have willingly aligned themselves with the fallible fatwa of a certain individual like Imam Shafi'i, in spite of the fact that the evidence goes against them, which is not the case, right? Which is not the case. Rather, we say this is the fact. So this Sheikh so and so says this is the case. Sheikh so and so says I think that's fine as individuals. But when we say a madhab, we're talking about 10,000 plus scholars all agreeing on a certain thing, right? So we could weigh the Shafi school against the Hanafi school. That's fine. Say, well, the Hanafi say something else. That's fine. But to say Sheikh so and so says this, or I think this, or I think this is stronger, it's not a very it's a moot point, right? It's not very interesting. Okay, so we said anything that comes out of the private parts breaks the wudu, whether it's something that's emitted or simply just coming out like a physical thing. We said the exception to that was sleep when firmly seated. So if you slept on an airplane, slept in a car, for example, and your behind is firmly seated, it doesn't break your wudu, even if you sleep for hours. Number two, touching private parts, whether it's your own, whether it's somebody else, whether it's a child, whether it's with lust, without lust, it doesn't matter. Just skin-to-skin contact with the inner palm of one's hand, the fingers and inner palm of one's hand, and private parts. Number two, skin-to-skin contact. That was, where was it? So it said anything coming out of the private parts is touching private parts, skin-to-skin contact. Where's our number four?
Sure, in the one paragraph, sleep and coming out of the private
Have that. So touching private parts, something coming out of the private parts, touching the opposite sex, and
sleep.
loss of intellect and loss of intellect, with the exception of somebody sleeping, right? So we have those four causes. And then we have here touching private parts, and then we have touching the opposite sex. So skin-to-skin contact, skin-to-skin contact. And again, we're not talking about whether it's permissible or not permissible to shake hands. That's another discussion. What we're talking about is skin-to-skin contact, whether it's halal or whether it's haram, whether it's with lust, whether it's not with lust, right? Whether it's with one's wife or not, or one's husband, irrelevant. The point is, if this person is in principle marriageable, you could marry them in principle, right? And the skin-to-skin contact, this breaks the wudu in the Shafi school. Okay. Is that the position of the other three madhahib? No, it isn't. Can I follow the other madhahib? Yeah, you can do that if you like. It's not a problem. But you are obliged to know at least what in their madhahib what breaks the wudu, know something, and you're obliged to respect and revere it as a viable explanation, right? So there's a big difference between somebody comes along and says the rajih is something else. The sheikh said hadith goes against it. That's fine. It's not really relevant, not very interesting. What's interesting is a whole other group of scholars have followed a clear and defined methodology and come to different conclusions. So we respect this position and we respect that position. If you don't want to follow this position, that's fine. If you want to follow another position, that's totally fine, right? As opposed to following the position of individuals. And it's what we see today. So it says on YouTube, my opinion. His opinion. I'm not talking about individuals. I'm talking about a school. Okay, and then we started this as well last week. We said the validity of the prayer is dependent upon knowing or being awareness of the time you either know or you are convinced, right, that the prayer time has come in. So you say a strong supposition, meaning I don't know what time it is, but I've been sitting here for ages. And so it must be Asr by now. You know, this has happened and this has happened. It must be Asr by now. So you don't have to know. It's sufficient that you have Ghalabat al-Dhann. Because if you pray when you with doubt, then the prayer doesn't count. So I'm not sure. If you ask me, I'd say, well, is it Asr time? No, I'm not really sure. Maybe you can't pray like that. Right? Okay. What about praying when you're not sure if the time has exited? That's not an issue. So I'm not even sure. So I know Asr came in 3 hours ago. Is it Maghrib yet? I don't know. So is it valid to pray Asr? Yes. So it is not a condition that the prayer time be in. Sorry, not a condition that the prayer time have not left, have not exited yet. It's a condition that the prayer time has come in. And that's why it's valid to do qada, of course, right? So do I have to intend whether it's a makeup, it's qada or not? No. So I missed a prayer, or I may have missed a prayer. I don't know if I missed a prayer or not. All I know is Asr time has come in. I don't know if Asr time has left or not. I'm not sure. So can I pray Asr? Yeah. As long as you know Asr time has come in. Okay? Does that make sense, Nader?
Yeah.
Okay, awareness of the Qibla, meaning you know specifically which the direction is in. So in the Shafi'i school, when we say Qibla, we mean the exact Qibla, right? So in the Shafi'i school, does that mean, so what if, for example, I'm praying in a non-purpose-built mosque, right? And I know that this used to be a building that was built for something else. It wasn't originally a mosque. And it's 10 degrees, 15 degrees, 20 degrees off the Qibla, right? And for convenience sake, everybody's praying 20 degrees off. Is that valid in the Shafi school? The answer is no, it's not. You cannot pray a prayer like that in the Shafi school. Can I follow another position? For example, the Hanafis, yeah? Hanafis, they say, as long as in the general direction, right? You've got a kind of 45-degree leeway either way. That's fine, right? But in the Shafi school, no, that's not valid. It's not a valid prayer in the Shafi school. Okay, and then you cover your aura, meaning a man's covering from his belly button down to his knees, and a woman's covering every single thing apart from her face and hands, right? And as we mentioned last week or the week before, for a woman to expose anything her more than her chin, right? So she's wearing a hijab, but the hijab is coming down such that the skin, right, of past her chin is exposed. That prayer is not valid in the Shafi'i school. So we need to be careful about that. And the removal of impurity from clothes. So on the clothes that you're actually wearing, they're pure. Your body, meaning your outer body, not your inside body. If you ate some najasa and you rinsed your mouth, could you pray? Yeah, the prayer would be valid, right? And the place of prayer, meaning the actual place that you're standing on. So where your feet are, where your knees are going to go, where your hands are going to go, where your forehead is going to go. So it doesn't matter that the general place is filthy, right? We're not talking about that. Obviously, that's not ideal. But we're saying that the point is it's the actual area that you're going to touch or that your clothes are going to touch actually pure. It is also necessary to pray the obligatory prayer standing up if one is able to, even on a plane. And again, to my knowledge, I don't know of a position that allows one to pray sitting down in an airplane, for example. I don't know if that's a position within the form of the ahim. It doesn't matter that maybe you see many people do that. That doesn't matter, right? That does not what many people do does not define the deen. That's why it's important for people to study fiqh, because you find out, whoops, that's not actually valid in the Shafi'i school. And then you check with the Hanafis, they say no. And they check with the Malikis, they say no. And you check with the Hanbalis, they say no. And they, realize that's a major problem. Okay, and again, this is a review as well. It says the obligations of the prayer. Okay, number one, so there's three things that happen to start the prayer, right? I'm intending to pray Dhuhr. Right now, I'm doing it. I'm saying Allahu Akbar properly. I'm not saying Allahu Akbar. I'm not breaking something or changing something. And I'm actually standing. So classic mistake. I wasn't aware of what I was doing when I started praying. The prayer has not started in the Shafi school. I said Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Right? Allahu Akbar. Right? Various different ways of pronouncing the Allahu Akbar in an incorrect way. It doesn't count. You haven't started praying. Or that the Imam is in ruku', he's bowing, and I'm rushing to pray, which I shouldn't do, but I'm rushing to pray, and I quickly say Allahu Akbar, intending to start Dhuhr prayer, even though I'm not standing, I'm actually in motion. So you have to stand still, face the Qibla. What am I doing? I am praying Dhuhr, Allahu Akbar. Number 3. So reading the Fatiha beginning to end correctly. So you have to do it properly. So that means you have to sit down in a class of Tajweed and say, Sheikh, am I missing any letters from the Fatiha? Am I dropping any letters? Am I changing any letters? Right? We mentioned last week that the dha, right? The dha instead of the la is not acceptable. Right? So you cannot say wala dhalin. You have to say wala dhalin. You can't say wala zawalin or wala dalin or something like that. That you can't do. Okay, and then number 4 is to do ruku', right? And that means you're gonna bow and you're gonna lean forward such that your palm, right, could touch your knees in principle, right? You do not have to actually rest your hands on your knees. That's not part of the bare minimum of ruku', but you have to lean forward such that you could do that. And you have to remain there for a second. Okay, so you go in, you don't have to say Allahu Akbar, you don't have to say Subhana Rabbil Azim, but you have to lean forward such that your palm could touch your knee in principle. Right? And then you have to straighten up. Again, you don't have to say Sami Allahu liman hamida, you don't do any of these adhkar, but you straighten up and then now you're upright, and then you pause. And then you go into sujood, and sujood means the skin of your forehead is on the ground. Your hands on what part of your either hand is on the ground, even if it's covered with gloves or behind a khimar, or it doesn't matter what it is. Your knees, even if they're covered, of course, for a man, they could be exposed in principle, as long as he's covering everything above the knee. But your knees are going to be on the ground. Okay, for a woman, obviously her knees are going to be covered, so that's fine. And the feet, whether they're covered or not, they have to be on the ground, and one has to bend back at least one toe, right? Such that the area that you normally stand on, right? If you were to stand on the ground, right? There's a part of the skin of the toe that's on the ground. You lean forward such that part of that is on the ground, right? You don't have to have all toes bent, but you have to have at least one toe bent. Okay? Does that make sense, Nadir?
Yeah.
Okay, and it says one must fulfill the above obligations in each rak'ah, in each unit of prayer. You have to do that. And then the first tashahhud, right, in Dhuhr or in Asr or in Maghrib or in Isha, and sitting during that part, right, is sunnah. You're not obliged to do that. So if you intentionally miss the first tashahhud, just because I can't be bothered to do it, I don't want to do it, right? The prayer is valid, right? There's nothing, you're not obliged to do anything. But the prayer will be valid. The second tashahhud is fard, is obligatory, meaning if you didn't do it, the prayer wouldn't count. So you have to sit and you have to say the tashahhud, at-tahiyyatu lillah, as mentioned here, at-tahiyyatu lillah, salam alaykum, alayka. So here's a little typo here, but salamu alayka, right? Salam alayka or assalamu alayka, right? This is kind of extra, you don't have to do that, but assalam or salam alayka ayyuhan nabiyyu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Salamun or assalam alayna alif wa ala alif ibadillahi salihin. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, or Allahumma salli ala Rasul, the messenger, ar-Rasul, right? Or Allahumma salli ala Nabi, or Allah, sorry, an-Nabi means the Prophet, the Prophet, right? The messenger. If you say ala Rasul, oh Allah, send blessings on a messenger, or ala Nabiyyin, or on a prophet, that wouldn't count. Okay, that's the bare minimum. And then you say Assalamu alaikum. And so here you do not have to say Assalam. Assalam. You can just say salam. With the salams, you have to say Assalamu alaikum. Right? You have to say it just once, right? It's sunnah to say it twice, but it's Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Right? Okay, and then it said, that's all clear. That's Nadir.
Yes. Where in the text does it talk about the salam and the
Sorry, Nadir, I can't. Your voice is a bit muffled.
Sorry, can you hear me better now?
I can hear it perfectly. Yes.
Okay. I was wondering, where in the text does it talk about saying Assalamu alaikum to end the prayer?
It does not. It mentions the tashahhud and it mentions maybe salams, I think. Here, the minimum taslim is Assalamu alaikum here.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. So minimum taslim is Assalamu alaikum. You do not have to turn. You don't have to intend to finish the prayer. You just say Assalamu alaikum. So if you did everything quietly, even in Maghrib and Isha, it's fine. I mean, it's fine in that the prayer counts. Okay. So it says it is required that one humbles oneself with total ikhlas, right? Making an action solely for Allah alone. Concentration hudur is required. Hudur means being aware of what one is saying, right? Well, what if I don't know Arabic? I understand that I'm talking to Allah, but I don't actually understand the words, right? I don't understand where am I saying. I understand, for example, tashahhud. I'm talking to Allah and I'm sending the greatest blessed greetings to Allah, and then I'm sending blessing Prophet, but I don't know when I'm saying what. That doesn't matter, right? The point is you have to understand what you're saying in general, right? Khushu' is submission of the limbs and concentration of the heart. So khushu' so hudur means I know who I'm talking to. Khushu' is the brokenness, the dread and awe, right? That's very important, right? So khushu' you can connect with appreciating the majesty of the one you're talking to, as opposed to hudur, appreciating the fact that you're actually talking to somebody. Okay. Now, here's a question, right? Fiqh is important, right? We understand fiqh is important. If you don't study fiqh, you can end up doing crazy things here and there. But what do you think most of the Sahaba thought about most of the time? Did they think about whether or not my Fatiha was correct? Because maybe some of them pronounced the Allah instead of the law, right? It's possible, right? Maybe they didn't memorize certain surahs or whatever it is. Or do you think they focused on the khushu'? What was their main thing that they were worried about, do you think?
For sure, I believe. Allahu alam, the khushu'.
Right? So that's what the Prophet was teaching them, because it was understood everyone's doing things properly. But there were certain scenarios where the Prophet said, what? He said, make sure you do the outward properly, right? So the Prophet said, make sure you do your ruku' right, and make sure you do your khushu' right, because I can see you behind my back, right? So the Prophet was focusing on both the outward and the inward, right? The rituals and the meaning of the rituals. So rituals without meaning are pointless. Meaning without a form is pointless, right? Or it's not, I wouldn't say pointless, it is not legislated, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has actually given us rituals, right? So for example, you say that you told somebody about hijab and they're like, hijab is about haya, for crying out loud. Like, what's the whole thing about cover this and cover that? It's like, as long as you carry yourself in the right way, it's culturally relative, da 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 da. You say, well, that's not actually true. That's not actually true. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us to have the form and the meaning. Both are necessary, right? There are certain things where it's just the meaning, right? Like humility, right? Like, how do you express humility like outside of sujood? How do you express humility? Right? It's obligatory to be humble, but how do you express it? It's just the meaning, right? Compassion, other than zakat, perhaps, right? How where are we obliged on a ritual or a formal way to express rahmah? Not really. So a lot of the Sharia is based on the meaning alone. Like what is the point of what you're doing? What is the spirit of it? But there are other things like no. Actually, the form is important. The form is actually important. So this is a ritual. It has to be done properly. Dua is not a ritual. Do it however you want. Any language, it's fine. But salah is a ritual. It has to be done properly. Right? So khushu' is the submission of the limbs and the concentration of the heart, pondering upon the understanding what's being read. Right. So this is our fiqh is easy to study. This is not easy to study. This is our life mission. Right. God accepts salah according to the amount of hudur. So your prayer is valid. Is it accepted? Not necessarily. Right. And one of the best things to do in prayer is to complain to Allah and seek forgiveness of Allah for one's lack of hudur. Say, oh Allah, every 2 seconds I'm getting distracted. Please forgive me. Please help me. That is hudur. Ya Allah, please forgive me. Please help me. Right? That's iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. I'm trying my best, Ya Allah. Oops, I daydreamed again. Right? And one thing we can do is you can if we're praying 5 times a day, is to focusing for at least a minute. So well, that's a kind of a low bar, right? But actually, if you catch yourself, if you really watch yourself in those 5 obligatory prayers, and you make sure that in every single one of them you are present of heart for at least a moment, okay, you will catch yourself out sometimes that you gave salams and you weren't even present for a moment. You will catch yourself out. So yeah, and be like, yeah, the first prayer, second prayer, but here and there. So if you start put that lower bar, right? So I'm not interested in a perfect prayer every single time. I'm interested in that at least one moment of each prayer I was focused. Like I could say, yes, I was there in that sujood. Yes, I was there in that before I gave salams. Yes, I was there in that part of the Fatiha. And then you build from there. You build, for example, now I'm going to be in my takbir, in my Fatiha, a moment in my ruku', a moment in my sujood, a moment here, a moment there, right? And you build from there. But it's very, very important to build from the top bottom up, because so many of us, we don't really realize how bad we are. We don't realize, for example, how cruel we are to other people, how lazy we are, how selfish we are, how little focus we have. And we have an opinion of ourselves that's quite high. Like, oh yeah, I focus. You say, do you focus most of the prayer? And be like, yeah. In reality, you don't. And in reality, you've prayed prayers that have zero focus at all. Right. So it's very important. Make that bottom line and then build up. Right. It's hard, right? When you start working, because you're like, oh man, right? But repeating a prayer. So in principle, in the Shafi school, is a prayer valid if you had zero focus? Yes. So then how could you repeat it? So you can't repeat it, right? But there are other positions in other madhahib that say you haven't prayed, right? Some of the Malikis have said things like that. Some of the Hanbalis have said things like that. And even a weak position in the Hanbali school that if you don't have khushu' or hudur for 50% more, of the prayer or more, then it doesn't count. So that means a lot of prayers can be repeated, right? Or you could do qada, right? There's fiqh ways around it, but I'm trying to say is a way of building up that basic line that you come on Yawm al-Qiyamah and say, oh Allah, my prayers weren't perfect, but I was actually genuinely trying to raise the average level from 0 or occasionally 0 to 1% or 5% or whatever it is, right? And then the reality, why is it that we cannot focus in prayer? The reason the focus is based on love. What are you attached to? So you are thinking about one thing because you're attached to that one thing, right? I just give an example. Somebody who teaches in, middle school and high school, right? Every single time a teenager, has certain hormones going through their body. And there's certain things they're talking about all the time. You can imagine what I'm referring to. And so every single time we're a teenager, right, particularly younger teens, right, 12, 13, 14, every single time you say something that may be construed as having a reference to those kind of that topic, that will be there. Why is that the case? Why is it that they'll pick out things, right? Sometimes because they're rude. Sometimes it's because that's like on their mind, like their body is pushing them in that direction, and that's their obsession, right? It's an obsession. That's their thing that they value. It's like really important to them. So they'll pick up on that and they'll think about that. And if you spoke about it, it'll be a big issue for them. And it'd be quite difficult for them to think about something else, right? Somebody who's, they're about to lose money, that's their focus. They value money, right? Or they value their child's in the ICU, may Allah protect us all, right? And they're like, it's quite hard for them to think about something else, And so if your one care and concern is, does Allah accept you? Has Allah rejected you? It's very hard for that person not to be thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the whole time. It's very hard. And it's very unnatural and weird for them to not be focused on Allah 100% in the prayer. Right? So our job then in life, in reality, is not to pray. Our job in life is to prepare ourselves to pray, which is the third part of this book, right? Which is perfecting our inner so that it's just natural. Like that's not a question, right? It's not a question. So what did one of the Sahabi do? Is he's praying in the orchard of his, and he got distracted by this, he got distracted by that. He's like, Subhanallah, I love the orchard more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he went to the Prophet and said, this is what happens. Should I give it away? Should I take it out of my heart by giving it in sadaqah for the sake of Allah? That's what he did. Right? This is exactly what they did, right? While I'm looking at something, the Prophet was praying and he's looking at something, right? The Prophet was not distracted in prayer, but he's like, this thing is, and so what the Prophet said, he moved it. Like, I don't want to have this, take this thing off, give it to somebody else, because I don't want to be distracted in prayer. Right? So this is a major, major thing. Right? This is life. Focus in prayer is life. Because the life process is cut out my fears, my anxieties, my worries, my concerns, my goals, my obsessions, and I have one thing, La ilaha illallah. I don't fear anything about Allah. I don't hope in anything about Allah. I'm not worried in anything about Allah. Nothing puts me up and nothing puts me down apart from my connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's all. Everything is channeled through that. And so when I pray, it's a prayer, as opposed to, may Allah forgive us all, the situation for many of us. So showing off in prayer and other times is forbidden. And this is a real thing. So generally speaking, people show off based on their social, their social and emotional, what's it called? Context. Okay. I'll just continue now, inshallah, just recording, if that's okay, because I need to.
Yes. Sheikh, can I ask a question?
Yeah,
though?
so go ahead.
Yeah. So did the other Shafi'i scholars place kind of in the rukun there the part about ikhlas and hudur and khushu'?
No,
Did they place the inner? Or is
no.
this kind of very unique to this scholar?
Yeah, so he's putting it here. He's putting it here because he's trying to give you the real context, right?
Yeah.
So it's like saying, for example, I'm going to teach tajweed, okay? And I'm teaching tajweed to somebody who's an atheist. And he's like, Subhanallah, I'm teaching tajweed. But what's the point in teaching tajweed? You don't even believe in Allah. So is aqidah, right, a part of tajweed? No. So imagine if you put it in, right? Because this is your audience. He's trying to pick a primer and he's saying, let's put it in. Let's connect the dots, right? As opposed to making it a very clinical, separated science. So no, hudur and these things, this is not a fiqh discussion, right? So it is a kind of fiqh discussion. It comes up in what's called al-khilaf al-ali when we're talking about on a very, very high level, is hudur an issue or not, but it's not a fiqh discussion. So why'd you put it there? So I'll put it there because what if you don't understand the context? Right, so that's why he's putting it here. But otherwise, it's a khushu' and these things is a discussion of ihsan and not a discussion of fiqh. Just like riyā, right? And so riyā again is a very, very real thing. If you are religious, you will naturally show off in religious things. That is normal and natural. It is very, very haram, but it's normal and natural, right? And one has to be very, very attentive to these things. And again, how do you find out? I know the Qamah is about to go, but how do you find out these things? You got to be jahid to shahid jami' al-fawaid. You have to fight against yourself. If you don't fight against yourself and you don't start digging problems, you will never know that you're a show-off at all. And you will be continually showing off and you'll be thinking, no, this is for this is for that, right? And so it's very, very important that we start ferreting out these things and working on ourselves. Otherwise, you'll never find out that you're actually ostentatious, right? May Allah forgive us all. Okay, Nadia, you have to leave.
Yes, Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. I'll finish with the recording later, inshallah. Barakallah.
Perfect. Okay, so it says acts that invalidate the prayer. So what breaks the prayer? Okay, there are various things that break the prayer, right? So there's a ritual, you engage in a ritual, and you can break that ritual. So number one, deliberately speaking in the prayer. So you're praying and you just start talking. Prayer's over. Even if it be only 2 letters. So if you go on purpose. So I know I cannot clear my throat in prayer. I know that if I make this sound, the prayer will be broken. As opposed to, I had no idea that clearing the throat broke the prayer. Or I did it forgetfully. Or it just happened. I just coughed. I just cleared my throat without thinking. That's fine. But if you knowingly and intentionally say, that's, so you said, that's, broke the prayer. But you didn't say that's interesting. You didn't make a complete sentence. It doesn't matter. The prayer is broken. Okay, so then what if it was unintentional? How much speech if it's unintentional? So if it's unintentional, for example, I was praying, I started daydreaming, somebody picks up my mug and they say, that's my coffee. So I said, that's my coffee. Whoops. And in the middle of whoops, I realized I shouldn't be speaking because I'm praying. It's fine. It doesn't matter. Right? A small amount. So tiny, just 2 letters. If you just say 2 letters intentionally, knowing that you're praying, knowing that you can't speak in prayer, knowing that you can't do that, it's going to break the prayer. But if you absent-mindedly said a few words, it doesn't matter. A large amount of so the same thing, coughing. Did you intentionally go? No, it just happened, right? You were aware of yourself doing it, but you weren't able to stop it. That doesn't matter, right? But what if it's a coughing fit? Okay, once you get to 7 coughs, prayer's over. So 7 consecutive coughs. Cough, 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 consecutively. Sneezing. Achoo, 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 achoo. Prayer's over. As opposed to sneeze, sneeze, pause. Sneeze, sneeze, pause. Sneeze, sneeze, pause. That's fine. Or cough, 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 pause. Cough, 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 pause. Cough, 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 pause. So the point is, if it's you're not doing it intentionally, it's a little bit excused. If it's a lot, even if it's unintentional, even if you didn't know about it, even if you forgot, it's so much that it breaks the ritual. It breaks the form of the prayer, right? So 7 or more, prayer is broken. Similarly, a large amount of action invalidates the prayer. Are you expected to be totally still in prayer? No. So your eyelids move. Well, of course, your eyelids are going to move, right? You move a little bit from side to side. You move your arm a little bit, right? A little bit is excused, but moving around, if you jumped up in the air, for example, the prayer is broken. You lean over and pick something up, it breaks the prayer, right? So 3 extra substantial movements, not like small movements, right? And now, if we read like the works of the late Shafis, it often sounds, it sounds a bit kind of robotic or pedantic, right? So the way they define it is to say 3 extraneous movements. It's not part of the prayer with a major limb. So a major limb meaning your hand, your arm, your head, as opposed to your ears, your eyelids, your fingers, right? So you moved your fingers, it doesn't matter. You move your hand, it does matter, right? It sounds a bit strict, right? When you see Shafis praying, right, properly, they're not praying like robots. So obviously, if you breathe, right, like you breathe in, obviously you're going to move. You watch somebody and they breathe, they're going to move because of breathing, right? So their balance will not be the same if they breathe. So they have moved their body a little bit. So if you take it in a kind of real, literally, it would mean like you could basically not pray, right? And so it shouldn't be like that. Just don't move around, don't pick something up, don't take your hat off, scratch your head, these kind of things, but just small movements, right? Blowing your nose, taking something carefully out of your pocket, turning a phone off, for example, may Allah protect us if it's, distracting people in prayer, something small, right? So Ibn Salah, for example, it's not necessarily relied upon, but just kind of gives a perspective, right? Ibn Salah, he said, he's kind of in the middle of the process of the Shafi school, coming after Imam Ghazali, but before Imam Nawawi and Rafi'i. He says, if you ask, what is the definition of moving around a lot in prayer? Like, what does that mean? Right? What does it mean to move around a lot? He said, well, the definition of a lot is, and you could look at somebody like, yeah, they move around a lot. So, well, what's the definition of not moving around a lot then? He says, well, if you're not sure that it's a lot, then it's little. Right? He says there's no definition. You know. So again, the late scholars are like, well, that's a bit vague, isn't it? So they're going to try and define it a bit more. But the point is, they're not trying to be pedantic. They're trying to be clear, right? And so we shouldn't become pedantic, right? Just pray, focus on what you're praying. Don't move around a lot. If you move around a lot, it breaks the prayer. Don't do that, right? And so then similarly, things that will break that ritual, right, will be things like eating. So any kind of eating intentionally breaks the prayer. Any kind of drinking intentionally breaks the prayer. But if you ate like a tiny little speck unintentionally, like you didn't realize that you just swallowed something, or a tiny little drop unintentionally, it doesn't matter, right? And it says, exposing the awrah without covering it immediately. So your awrah, the nakedness that has to be covered in prayer, is for a man between his knees and his belly button, and around, obviously around his back and the back of his knee, right? And for a woman, everything other than the face and hands. So that means a woman has to cover her socks in prayer, either by wearing covering her feet in prayer, either by wearing socks or by having a dress that's long, for example, right? So if your awrah is exposed and you cover it immediately, right? The wind blows, something like that, it fell down, and you cover it immediately, it's fine. If you don't cover it immediately, prayer is broken, right? Filth as well, you're praying and a dog leads against you. You stand to the side, right? You pray and, I don't know, some dry dung blows in the wind and goes onto your trousers, and you just lean forward and it just falls off immediately. It's fine. But if you pick up the najasa, right? A mouse runs by and dies on your lap, right? A puppy comes and sits on your lap while you're praying. Okay, as we know, you can have a dog for safety, you can have a dog for hunting, guard dog, etc. But you can't have a dog as a pet. So anyway, you're outside on your farm, and your puppy comes along and sits on your lap while you're praying, and you pick him up and move him. Prayer's over, right? As opposed to he leant against you, right? And he just stepped to the side. He's just next to you, just touching you, right? You didn't actually support him. I wouldn't say lean. I think the best thing is he standing next to you, such that you're touching him, but leaning against you, such that you're supporting him. That's considered carrying. That's something else. But as long as it's not moist, and as long as you're not carrying it, that's fine. It just comes off immediately, right? And there are various types of filth that are excused anyway. For example, your own blood, right? For example, traces of urine or feces that after wiping yourself, you wiped yourself properly, as we'll discuss, and you're clean, but there's obviously still some filth on you, right? And so there's scenarios where things can be overlooked, right? You work on a farm, you got a bit of animal waste on you, that's kind of normal, right? You work with certain chemicals, like let's say, for example, alcohol, you work with it in a lab, or I don't know, something like that, and it's a little bit on you. Something you're exposed to on a regular basis is going to be overlooked, right? A little bit of vomit from your baby that you've exposed to on a regular basis, it's going to be overlooked a little bit, right? But by default, filth is not excused. So a worshipper does two essential actions before the imam. Likewise, if he fails to follow the imam without legitimate reason, his prayer is invalidated. So you have to follow the imam, right? When you're praying, you have to follow the imam. So if the imam goes into ruku', comes out of ruku', and starts leaning forward, right, such that he's no longer standing anymore, right? You don't say, oh, he's still standing. He's leaning forward, now he's going to sujood. Your prayer's over, right? He goes into sujood, comes out of sujood, goes into sujood, right? As soon as he comes up, your prayer's over, right? So even before that, he goes into sujood, he comes out, right? He's now one integral ahead of you. He's now sitting up, and he starts leaning forward, okay? And now he is closer to sujood than he is to sitting up. He's already finished the sitting up position. So he's done his sujood ahead of you. He's bowing it, and he's done his sitting up ahead of you. He's now about to go into sujood. He's closer to sujood than he is to sitting up. Prayer's over, right? And likewise, lagging behind the imam. Now, there are certain scenarios where you could lag behind the imam. For example, you're super slow because you've got a bad back, right? You have an issue, like it's very hard for you to get into ruku', it takes you some time. So he says Allahu Akbar, and you're getting into ruku', and he comes out, and you're still getting to ruku', and you're straight, he's standing up, and you're still getting to ruku', and now he's going to sujood. That's fine. You're all elderly, you've got a bad back, that's kind of fine. You have some kind of thing like that. Or for example, you haven't done the whole Fatiha, right? Now, it's a bit complex. When do you have to do the whole Fatiha? And that's why we have to study, right? We should study a bit more, find out about those details. But generally speaking, if you stood behind the Imam in, for example, the first 2 rak'ahs, right? When he's usually given you enough time to do the whole Fatiha, you have to do the whole Fatiha, right? Whether he recited aloud, whether he didn't recite aloud, you have to do the whole Fatiha, right? This is the Shafi position, the position of Imam Bukhari and others, right? That you have to recite the Fatiha in every single rak'ah, even behind the Imam, even if he recites aloud. That's the Shafi school. So there are certain times where he doesn't give you a chance to do the whole Fatiha, in which case you just bow. But if he's given you a chance to do the whole Fatiha, you have to do the whole Fatiha. And if you don't, you can lag behind the Imam. You don't have to catch him in ruku'. You know, you can lag behind a little bit, just like somebody who's got a bad back or who finds it difficult to move quickly. Right, but otherwise you cannot lag behind the Imam. Let's say, for example, to complete a surah or to just for reason, you have to follow the Imam. The Imam goes into ruku', you have to go into ruku', etc. And the Prophet said, "Innama ju'ila al-imam liyutamma bih." The Prophet said the Imam is only there, the leader is only there to be taken as a leader. That's his job. Why else would you be praying behind him? Okay. And then it says, so lagging behind the Imam breaks the prayer. There's other things that break the prayer as well, but that's the general picture. So the Jum'ah, right? So you pray your fard prayer, you pray your obligatory prayer. What else is obligatory prayer? For every male, right? You're going to have to pray Jum'ah, right? And this is hard in a non-Muslim country, right? Or a Muslim country where they don't have Friday off. It is hard, right? So am I excused because I'm a non-Muslim country? The answer is no. The principle in fiqh is an-nadir la hukm lahu, something that's rare, right? A rare scenario that you happen to be in a non-Muslim country, or you happen to be in a Muslim country that doesn't have Friday off, or doesn't give people rights to, I don't know, that's a rare scenario, right? The world doesn't work around you. The world works around general things. So the Sharia comes along and says, generally speaking, it's hard for certain people to pray Jummah, so they're excused. For example, women, for example, slaves, right? In the past, when there were slaves, like, well, there were people who were like watching cattle, watching this, as it was hard to pray, right? So those kind of people, it's kind of harder for them to turn up at a certain time in a certain place to pray with everybody else, right? So that's going to be excused on a world level, but on an individual level, no. Right. So the fact that it's really hard for you to find a full-time job that actually enables you to pray Jummah, that's right. You obviously get the reward for that. It's difficult, but that doesn't change the deen. Right? It doesn't change the deen because an-nadir la hukm lahu, something that's rare and not a normal situation, does not bring about a particular change in things. Right. So if you did statistics, statistically, Muslims in the West who pray Jummah, are they more likely or less likely to hold down a full-time job? Probably less likely, right? Once you get to the upper echelons of society, yeah, it doesn't really matter, right? There's a bit of leeway, but let's say basic employment, like most people, I want you to be at a certain place, certain time, and follow certain systems. So it's going to be hard, right? It's going to be hard. So Allah tests some people in some ways and other people in other ways. May Allah make it easy for us, right? But as long as you can keep down a job, you're not excused. Okay, what if I can't keep down a single job, right? I cannot drive taxi, drive Uber. I can't do that kind of stuff. Medical reason, legal reasons, whatever. Fine. I cannot find a single job that will allow me to take off that 1 hour or 30 minutes to get to the prayer. I can't do it. Every single time I have an interview, it's the same discussion. Can I have an hour and a half off to drive to the local mosque and come back? They say no. So I cannot hold down a single job. Okay. Now, specifically for you, you'd have no way of getting income, and you're obliged to support yourself. Okay, go ahead. Miss Jummah prayer until the time that you can find a job that allows you to pray Jummah. Right? Until that time. Otherwise, you're not excused. Right? So the Friday prayer is fard ayn, personally obligatory. You have to make sure you pray it. Right? As opposed to the group prayer, which is fard kifaya. So fard kifaya means somebody has to pray it. In your Muslim community, some men have to pray Fajr together. Some men have to pray Dhuhr together. Some men have to pray Asr together. You don't have to pray Asr together with anybody else, but that's the group. For Jum'ah, no. You personally have to be there. For every Muslim who is male, free, it's not a slave, right? They don't exist anyway, but resident in the locality. Are you a traveler right now? No. Okay, you have to pray Jum'ah. Not excused by a legal exemption such as a sickness or rain, right? Risk to your life, right? There's riots happening, a war zone. You are very sensitive to environments. You have to stay in a certain area, and if you get there, you get sick or whatever it is. Your wife is sick and your children are sick, and you have to stay home and look after all of them. There's nobody to watch them. Okay, sure. So you're sick, you have to look after somebody else is sick. There's a risk to life, whatever it is, something like that. Okay, you're stuck in traffic. So, well, I'll just park my car here. You can't do that, can you? So yeah, I mean, I could walk in 10 minutes. Like I could just get out of my car right now in the middle of the street where in traffic and walk to Jummah. Am I obliged to do that? No, Habibi, you can't do that. You can't just leave your car in the middle of the street where, block the whole of traffic. You can't do that. I can't find a place to park. I'll just double park. You can't double park. That's not your property. Right? Okay, well, what am I going to do? I'm about to miss Jummah. Okay, miss Jummah. So you cannot. So are you allowed to take someone else's wealth or take someone else's rights in order to pray Jummah? No, you're not obliged to do that. So there's also an excuse. There's literally no parking. Zero. Right? Zero parking. You can't do that. Right? It's not your road. It's not your, I'll just park in my neighbor's drive. Does he allow you? I'll just park. They don't care. They're not even at work. They're not at home right now. Ask them, do you mind next week if I park on your drive? Otherwise, if you don't know that you can park on someone else's drive, there's no legal place to park, right? The only way you could attend Jummah is by obstructing traffic or by double parking, right? And taking someone else's rights, then you're excused, right? Next time, plan a bit better, carpool, etc. But generally speaking, every male, even if they have not reached puberty, this is even harder, subhanAllah. So my son is 8 years old. He goes to public school. He also has to pray Jummah. It's tough. Okay? So in the Shafi school, he has to pray Jummah. He has to pray every other prayer, he has to pray Jummah. Right? So try your best. Speak to the school, see what can be done. If it's really no way, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, there are other madhahib that don't make it obligatory for a child to pray Jummah, and that is quite difficult. It's hard enough for you to get there, let alone you have to go and pick him up and take him there. That's really hard, right? That's really hard. So try your best, right? It's very important. You are making a huge statement to your kid when you say you have to pray Jummah. That's a huge statement. You're telling him this is what it means to be a man. And this means you're a boy, but yes, you need to be there. This is what, when you're older, you're gonna have to go out of your way, just like Daddy's doing. You're gonna have to go out of your way to do this thing. So this is important, right? Take it as, instead of saying, "Oh, this is difficult," look at it as a learning opportunity, right? It's important. It might kick and scream at that point, but no, it's important, right? Try your best. If it's really, really difficult, don't be too extreme. There are different opinions on whether or not a child has to attend Jummah, but in the Shafi school, a young boy has to attend Jummah. Among the conditions of Jummah are that there has to be 2 sermons, right? The Imam does one sermon, sits down, gets up another sermon, right? The essential, the bare minimum khutbah, so the khutbah does not have to be long. You can do a khutbah in 2 minutes, not a problem. There's nothing wrong with doing a khutbah in 2 minutes. Totally fine. he has to say the words hamd. The word praise has to be there somewhere. Either I praise Allah, all praise be to Allah, we praise Allah, right? Something like that. So if he does a khutbah and there is no word Alhamdulillah or Nahmadullah or Ahmadullah that doesn't exist at all, that is not a khutbah in the Shafi school. Right? Sending blessings on the Prophet ﷺ by name. Right? Not wa ala alihi, not wa sallallahu alayhi, not blessings be upon him, but Allahumma salli ala nabi, Allahumma salli ala rasul, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, sallallahu ala Muhammad, right? Sallallahu alayhi wasallam, something like that. You can't say, for example, I bear witness there's no God but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. No, that doesn't count, right? There has to be praise of Allah, and there has to be sending blessings on the Prophet himself, not through a pronoun. And encouraging people to fear Allah. So taqwa, saying fear Allah, this has to be there, right? We have to encourage people to fear Allah. And to recite some verses of the Quran in Arabic in each of the two, right? So here it says in each of the two. Okay, and then I don't believe that's actually correct. Let me just double check. That is not correct. Yeah, in one of them. It says in each of the two, in one of them. So you have to recite a verse of the Quran that is a verse of the Quran in one of them, or part of the Quran in one of them, not in both of them. And to pray for the believers in the last. So he stands up, he says, Alhamdulillah, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, ittaqullah. I praised Allah. I sent blessings on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay. And I said, fear Allah. He sits down. He stands up. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. So, Alhamdulillah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Okay. Ittaqullah. I encourage people to fear Allah. Now I have to do Quran either in the first or the second. Right? Bismillah. Qul huwallahu ahad. Allahu samad. Lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. And then in the last one, Allahumma ghfir lil mu'minin wal mu'minat. Oh Allah, forgive the believing men and women. That's it. How long did that take me? A minute, 30 seconds. So you can do the khutbah, the two khutbahs in 30 seconds, pray in another 2 minutes. You can get the whole of Jummah done in 5 minutes. The whole of Jummah done in 5 minutes, not a problem. Right. It is necessary for the one delivering the prayer to do so while standing, to be pure, and for his aura to be covered. Right? He doesn't have to be in a pulpit, doesn't have to be in a mosque, right? Any public space, the meet in a park, right? There's no masjid. You don't need to have a masjid in your area, right? The Muslims are going to gather in a park. We're going to gather in a place where everybody knows we're going to gather. This place that's accessible to people, just go there. To do so while standing, he must sit between the two sermons, pause, and should pause longer than the normal pause in prayer. He's got to sit down, pause, 1, 2, get up, right? And that is the prayer. That is Jummah. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Subhanallah wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.